in all kinds of things. We also started the use of solar energy and windmills and hydroelectric and that sort of thing, and we've faltered with that. Now China has taken over. China is the number one producer of advanced windmills and photovoltaic cells and so forth. But had the energy policy not been abandoned, we wouldn't be in the bad shape we are now. But yes, you're right, peace. We had tremendous challenges to my administration and to the United States when I was in the White House. But we were lucky, I say lucky enough, and I think maybe used good enough judgment not to start a war. We never dropped a bomb, we never fired a bullet, we never launched a missile during the time I was in office, and we still upheld the integrity and good faith of our country. And in human rights, we were the world champion of human rights, there's no doubt about that. So, a lot to be proud of.
It's been a good life. And you're not
been a good life? No, I hope not.
But you did give us a scare a few weeks ago, though. I'm glad you're doing well.
But I was just sick for one day, but unfortunately...
But you're Jimmy Carter, exactly. And the next day, you were out building Habitat houses again.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Mr. President.
Nice to be with you all.
Always good to have you on.
I have had the honor of interviewing former President Jimmy Carter many times over the course of my broadcast career. As we all know, the 98-year-old former president has chosen to spend his remaining days at home in hospice, and his hometown of Plains, Georgia, is holding a daily vigil. We speak now for the rest of this hour with the author Kai Bird about what he calls the unfinished presidency of Jimmy Carter. I am pleased to have Kai Bird on this program. Kai, how are you today, sir?
I'm good. Thank you, Tavis, for having me on your wonderful show.
It's my great honor to have you. Thank you for your work, and good to have an hour to unpack this legacy, I suspect, in the coming days. And this feels a bit morbid on the one hand. On the other hand, I think that Jimmy Carter's presidency deserves the kind of unpacking, the kind of interrogation, and frankly, in many respects, as you heard him say a moment ago, the kind of rethinking all of these years later. And so I suspect in the coming days, whenever that moment comes, that he makes his transition, the focus of the nation, and certainly the news media, will be looking back on the presidency of Jimmy Carter and certainly his life as a public citizen beyond his days in the White House. There'll be a lot to unpack. And so I, again, suspect in the coming days we'll be doing more of that. I've got, again, so many interviews with him in my library, all kinds of clips that we will pull out at the appropriate time and share and look back on the life and legacy of one Jimmy Carter. But I want to talk to you today because I know that your book is dropping in paperback. Came out, I should say, paperback some months ago. And wanted to call you early on because I figure others will be calling you as well to talk about your book. The book is called The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. Let me start our conversation. Again, we've got an hour here, so let's just work this out, Kai. Let me start with that title. Titles mean a great deal to me, and this one jumps out at you. When you call him The Outlier, let's unpack that first. And then when you say the unfinished presidency of Jimmy Carter, let's unpack that second, and we'll jump from there. So why refer to him as the outlier?
Sure. Well, he's a very misunderstood president and very complex, much more complex than people realize. And one of his qualities is that he was a very unusual politician. And so I chose the title. Titles are, you're right, very hard. I chose the title The Outlier because I think it sort of captured who he was. And, he's sort of, he's hard to pin down. He's a liberal on race and on social issues, but he is also a sort of fiscal small-town conservative on the budget, the federal budget, and small government. And so he's kind of hard to pigeonhole. And he's kind of, he's his own man, his own thinking. And so the outlier captures who he was. He came from nowhere to win the presidency in a very improbable race in 1976. Mm-hmm. And once he was in the White House, he just tried to do the right thing. And he was rather shocked when he lost in 1980 to that failed Hollywood movie actor. And he then plunged into depression for a little while and snapped out of it when he realized what he should do with the rest of his life, which was to build the Carter Center and use it to continue his presidency. So that's why I call it the unfinished presidency. He has done fabulous things for humanity, humanitarian projects, health projects, wiping out guinea worm disease, Habitat for Humanity, conflict resolution in the Middle East. You know, he's willing to grapple with tough issues. Yeah. And many of these issues are things that he worked on when he was in the White House. So again, it's the unfinished presidency.
Yeah. Thank you for taking those questions now that we understand better why the book is called The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. When we come forward, a great deal to interrogate. I mentioned a moment ago that I've had many opportunities to sit with President Jimmy Carter, which I am forever grateful for. In one of those sit-down conversations, we'll play this clip, I'm sure, in the days ahead, I asked President Carter, and I kind of was somewhat afraid to do it, but when it came out of my mouth, I had hoped, I thought maybe I should have pulled it back, but I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't because he gave a great answer. But I asked him, we were seated, obviously just a foot or two apart on my TV set. We could touch each other, and I said to him, face to face, Mr. Carter, President Carter, how would you respond to the notion that many believe that you are the best ex-president we've ever had? That you're the best ex-president, as you heard Kai Bird say a moment ago. So much was accomplished by Jimmy Carter once he left the White House, and he answered the question. He was nice about it, but as I said the other day, he spanked me a little bit when he finally got around to answering it. It was a question I thought needed to be asked, and so I asked it because so many people have talked about his post-presidency being far more significant than his presidency. We'll put that question, or that notion at least, and a great deal more in this hour to our guest, Kai Bird, author of the book The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter, as the nation just sort of waits through this period of his hospice at home. And every one of us eventually has to do that dance with mortality, and Jimmy Carter is doing that dance right now. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
Our Weekly Los Angeles is the largest audited black newspaper in the state of California, with a distribution of over 50,000 copies weekly. Pick up a copy every Thursday to get the latest news on African American communities of LA. You can also keep up with what's going on in Los Angeles and surrounding cities by going to www.ourweekly.com. The Our Weekly website is updated daily with the current news about us and for us. For your advertising needs, Our Weekly offers economical advertising packages to fit your budget. Feel free to call Our Weekly Los Angeles at 323-905-1300 or visit the website at www.ourweekly.com. Our Weekly Los Angeles, reporting news that matters to you.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, Maisha Cairo here, KBLA, live at Chase Bank on Crenshaw and Vernon for the In This Together tour with female business owners, a day of empowerment, community panels, and best of all, tips on building business from marketing to capital. I was able to speak with one of the panelists, the owner of Kids Love. Take a listen.
So Kids Love, KIDSLUV, is a first-to-market zero-sugar, vitamin-enhanced functional beverage for kids.
So the zero sugar is really important because if not, the sugar gets on the teeth, it can cause cavities. So as a mom, I love this vitamins and hydration in one. Tell us what's happening here with Chase Bank today.
So I would say, I think what Chase is trying to do is create a community actually for entrepreneurs, a place where people can go. They have the space to do it. It's a beautiful space. And to be able to have these conversations. There are so many benefits to being a women-owned and certified business, from a standpoint of getting into stores, not paying the slotting fees of what it takes to be in stores. So I think Chase is is trying to bring awareness to a lot of the things that people just don't know about, that not only the bank can help, but outside of the bank, their relationships can help create.
That's beautiful. And I know, this is how we build equity in communities of color, is kind of spreading that information and that knowledge. So thank you for being here today and doing your part and letting these women know that it is possible.
For KBLA 1580, I'm Maisha Cairo in the community with Chase.
Hi.
Who's this?
Buzz. He appears whenever you eat Honey Nut Cheerios.
Like a genie?
Sure.
Ooh, does he grant wishes? I wish I lived in a giant boot. No, I wish I could swim with a humpback whale. No.
I can grant you a delicious bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios, which can help lower cholesterol as part of a heart-healthy diet.
Ooh, with heart shapes, too.
Happy heart-shaped Cheerios are back for a limited time. Pick up a box of Honey Nut Cheerios at your local store for an easy, delicious, and heart-healthy start to your day.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Kai Bird, you heard me say a moment ago, I asked President Carter that question, whether or not he thought he was the best ex-president we ever had. How would you process that question?
Well, I know that he's very annoyed by that question because he's actually quite proud of his 4 years in the White House. He thought he had a very consequential presidency. And again, I think his ex-presidency has simply become an extension of his unfinished presidency. He really wanted a second term, and he thought he could have accomplished a lot more. But yeah, he's very proud of his White House years, and I think also he's been very proud of what he's done the last 4+ decades in the Carter Center.
Yeah, to your point of a moment ago, and I say this with all due respect, again, I love President Carter. You won't meet I've never met a nicer person. And on a personal level, the fact that he kept writing all these books and doing other work in this country and around the globe, and every time he would do a tour for a book or something special, he always made sure I was on his list. And so I'm forever grateful for him making sure that this young black kid from Mississippi was always on his list when he did these tours. That said, I think there's a bit of naivete when you suggest earlier, naivete on his part, not your part, that he was shocked and surprised when he lost that race. I mean, all of the indicators by the time he got to that re-election in 1980 were that he was in trouble. His ratings were in the toilet. He survived a vicious assault from Ted Kennedy. And I can tell you now in my many conversations with him, as you certainly well know as a scholar, I don't know if he ever forgave Ted Kennedy for that. But as bitter as he was about losing that race, he was bitter about what Ted Kennedy did primarying him. I mean, you're a sitting president. You're not supposed to be primary. There's a great deal of conversation right now about whether or not Joe Biden ought to stand for re-election. And if he does, whether or not some Democrat will primary him. But my point is that President Carter had to be a bit naive, to my mind, if he thought that he was going to win that race.
Well, he was a little bit naive, but it came from his just enormous self-confidence, and he's a fighter. And people think of him as a woolly-headed humanitarian liberal, but he, when he wanted something, when he wanted to win an election, he was willing to do what was necessary, and he was good at it. Hunter Thompson, the famous Gonzo journalist for the Rolling Stone, when he first met him in 1974, it was at the Georgia Law Day event where Carter was giving a speech and where Ted Kennedy was giving a speech. And Hunter Thompson witnessed the two of them go at it. And Carter, he thought, was just brilliant, gave this rousing speech about the injustice of Southern justice against the black man in particular in South Georgia. And he beat Ted Kennedy in that first encounter. And, they just didn't get along. They were like oil and water. But Hunter Thompson came away from watching that experience and decided that Jimmy Carter was one of the meanest men he had ever encountered. What he meant was, that he was pragmatic, ambitious, and he would do what it was going to take to win. And I think that's true. Carter came from nowhere to win the governorship and then to win the White House. And, he did what was necessary in those early races, particularly in that 1970 gubernatorial race. He walked right up to the line with dog whistles, trying to appeal to white rural voters, and at the same time campaigning in black churches.
Mm-hmm.
He was just Machiavellian and brilliant at it. And then once he wins the governor's race, he shocked everyone on day one with his inaugural speech, announcing that the time for racial discrimination in the South was over, shocking everyone on the stage. Yeah. This was considered a betrayal by a white politician of his race in January of 1971. And then he proceeded to do what he thought was the right thing, and he appointed large numbers of African Americans to positions in the governor's office. And likewise, when he ran for the presidency and won it there, he changed the federal judicial bench and appointed more African Americans to the federal bench than all of his predecessors combined. But he was willing to do what was necessary to win power so that he could do good.
Yeah. Let me come to this now, and this may get me in some trouble, not the first or the last time, but let's just go. Because, again, in the coming days, as he makes his transition, we'll be talking a great deal more about it. So I'm sure I'll get a chance to get myself in more trouble in the days and weeks and months to come.
Okay.
But to my mind, there are two presidents that stand above all others. This is just me talking. When it comes to the issue of race. And by that I mean expressly their understanding of it and their courage around it. Now, I could debate you on, and I'm sure people would debate me on Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln starts out on the wrong side of the slavery question. No question about that. He starts out on the wrong side. And if it were not for a guy named Frederick Douglass, as we sit in Black History Month, February, were it not for Frederick Douglass, Lincoln would not have gotten on the right side of the slavery question. But Lincoln does, in fact, whatever you think of him, fight a war over the institution of slavery to save the Union. So whatever my misgivings may be about Abraham Lincoln, you can't fade the brother. He fought a war to save the Union over the institution of slavery. He got on the right side of that question in time. So Lincoln is Exhibit A. Exhibit B for me is Jimmy Carter, for many of the reasons that you just laid out. Jimmy Carter was never afraid of race. He didn't run away from it. He ran to it, starting with his inaugural speech, as you mentioned, when he was elected governor. All the time through his time as governor, his time as president, he never ran away from the issue of race. And there's a lot to ask about that. Let me just start with this. How did Jimmy Carter become so sensitive? So many folk are anesthetized to that issue these days and want to run away from it because race just gets you in trouble. Let's just call a spade a spade. In many ways, Barack Obama, and you can argue why, for many reasons, ran away from the issue of race. Jimmy Carter didn't do that. Joe Biden is not doing that. But why and how did Jimmy Carter become so comfortable with black folk?
Well, it's a very improbable story because his father was a white supremacist, believed in segregation. He was a racist. And yet Jimmy was not. And I think the reason is clearly because of his mother, Miss Lillian, who came from a different Southern tradition. She was the eccentric Southern lady who could speak her mind, and she talked. You mentioned Abraham Lincoln. She admired Abraham Lincoln, and in South Georgia, in certain circles, that was taboo. But she was a nurse, and she took in as patients African Americans, white, whatever. She didn't charge sometimes. She allowed black folk to come into their house to the discomfort of her husband. So Jimmy grew up in Archery just down the road from Plains. And literally, he was the only white boy in town in this little hamlet. And all his childhood friends were African American. And so he felt very comfortable all his life in this culture. And he felt comfortable going into a black church and singing the hymns. And he loved the South in a way that, and black culture in a way that I think is very unusual.
No.
So an extraordinary man, and he used his presidency. He wanted to bridge the racial divide and bring us together. And of course, I think, I argue in The Outlier that one of the reasons he lost in 1980 to Ronald Reagan was that he suffered a backlash from a lot of white voters, working class white voters, evangelical white voters who were unhappy with everything that he had done. And that was a tragedy for the country, and I think he was shocked by that.
I want to come back to this issue of evangelicism, in part because Jimmy Carter himself is an evangelical, and to your point, they turned against him in that election of 1980. But I want to put a finer point on this, and you're a scholar, so you know this stuff better than I do. But it's always worth pointing out, and I never ever want people to forget that while Ronald Reagan destroyed Jimmy Carter in that race back in 1980, Jimmy Carter had always been on the right side of race questions, on the right side of race issues. Ronald Reagan announced his candidacy for presidency in Philadelphia, Mississippi, the place where Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney were murdered. And he advanced the notion in his announcement of states' rights. Now watch this. Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. Why is the former governor of California in Mississippi in Philadelphia?
He was sending a message.
Exactly. In Philadelphia, where they murdered Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney, announcing his presidency. Don't talk to me about Ronald Reagan. I don't want to hear about it. That's where he started, and so it should be no surprise what we got or didn't get, depending on the issue, during the 8 years of his presidency. I don't care what they say about Ronald Reagan. I will never forgive him for being very abundantly clear of where he stood when he made that announcement that he was running for president in Philadelphia. And that was an absolute contrast, as you hear Kai Bird saying now, an absolute contrast to who Jimmy Carter was, and that may very well be why. One of the many reasons why Jimmy Carter lost that race against Ronald Reagan, because Reagan was not just I wouldn't call that a dog whistle, Kai. He was abundantly clear about where
it was outrageous.
Yeah,
it was outrageous. He was sending a big, broad message to the American voters who were uncomfortable with race and uncomfortable with what Jimmy Carter was doing.
Indeed. When we come forward,
outrageous.
No, that's a perfect word for it. Outrageous. When we come forward, so much more to talk about regarding the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter. I can hear him saying right now, Kai, Tavis, I ain't dead yet. I'm still here. And he's correct. He is still living, still breathing, although in hospice. But there's no time like the present to start talking about the presidency of Jimmy Carter and whether or not there are ways with all the years that have gone by to sort of rethink, to reimagine, to relook at his presidency. When we come forward, I'm sure some of you are listening right now thinking, why didn't you put Bill Clinton on your list of one of the best presidents on the issue of race? I love Bill Clinton, personal friend, but Bill Clinton was wrong on some issues, and he and I went back and forth about it while he was president. He was wrong on the welfare bill. He was wrong on the crime bill, and those things hurt black people in some significant ways. So I love him, but he was wrong on a number of things, and to my mind, Jimmy Carter, all things considered, was better on race than Bill Clinton was, even though they were both from the South. He had experiences living with and befriending black people. More to come when we move forward after news, traffic, and sports on KBLA Talk 1580.
Black LA's only destination for unarmed truth and unconditional love. The time for silence has passed. The time to speak is now. At KBLA Talk 1580. We're listening. Not just during Black History Month, but every day of the year.
Doug Davis, and here's the latest from the Black Information Network. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker is co-sponsoring a bill in Congress that would give every American newborn a nest egg that would gain interest until the child turns 18. Supporters say it would help close a long-established racial wealth gap, while Booker says it would make economic opportunity a birthright for Americans. Virginia's next congressperson is still pinching herself. That's what Jennifer McClellan said yesterday after her historic win on Tuesday. She became the first black woman ever elected to Congress from Virginia. McClellan tells CBS 6 she feels like she has broken a ceiling for her daughter and little girls of color all over Virginia. Actress Halle Bailey says as a black person, she expected the backlash around her casting in The Little Mermaid. Speaking to The Face, Bailey said people don't understand that when you're black, there's a whole other community and it's so important for us to see ourselves. The Little Mermaid is set to hit theaters on May 26. And that is the latest. I'm Doug Davis from the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Dave Matthews Band Live. Friday, August 25th, Yamava Theater. On sale now at YamavaTheater.com or the casino box office. Pre-order the new album, Walk Around the Moon, now.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
As LeBron James put it, the most important 23 games of his career are coming up. The key stretch for LeBron and the Lakers begins tonight at home against Golden State. The Lakers are 5 games below 500 and need to climb over Portland, Utah, and Oklahoma City just to qualify for the play-in round. Russell Westbrook is officially a member of the Clippers. He signed a contract Wednesday and told reporters he's happy to be on a team that wants him. A highly motivated Westbrook makes his debut with the Clippers Friday night against Sacramento. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. This sports report was brought to you by Original Taco Pete.
Aaron at Original Taco Pete's. Come in today for our tasty seasoned black taco. We're at 3272 West Slauson off Crenshaw, or call 323-348-4441.
KBLA Talk 1580 would like to thank all of the businesses that tune in to KBLA at work. We celebrate you, your calls to the station, and your overall support. To show our appreciation, we would like to treat your office to lunch for 10, sponsored by John O'Groats family-owned restaurant and johnogroats.us. Open the KBLA Talk 1580 app or log on to KBLA1580.com to submit your office to be selected for our Office of the Week. We know you're just like our staff, putting in many hard, smart working hours per week. We just want to say thank you, and we appreciate you. You and your staff deserve lunch on us. Enter your office to win lunch for 10 and be highlighted on KBLA Talk 1580 as our Office of the Week. Open the KBLA app or log on to KBLA1580.com to enter your office today to become the KBLA Talk 1580 Office of the Week. Sponsored by John O'Groats family-owned restaurant and johnogroats.us. Become the KBLA Talk 1580 Office of the Week. This has been a KBLA Talk 1580 community call to action.
Are you a business owner, freelancer, or filing taxes for the first time? Are you tired of dodging the IRS? Stop what you're doing now. Mac Tax Solutions, the father and son dynamic duo tax team, is the most sought-out tax business around. Mac Tax Solutions guarantees 100% maximum refund and free consultation. Call now, 562-715-9945. That's 562-715-9945. Or visit MacTaxSolutions.com. IRS or California FTB notices. Free e-file remote tax services with free secure tax dome portal. A $40 gift card will be included when you file. Call now, 562-715-9945. 562-715-9945. Staying on track with all required documents will help you reach your personal and financial goals. Prevent paycheck garnishments. Mac Tax Solutions will even provide all tax programs that your business could be eligible for. Now is the time to make your business work for you. Call now, 562-715-9945. Be sure to download the KBLA app. Tell all your friends and families it's time for a fresh tax start. Call now, 562-715-9945, or visit the website at MacTaxSolutions.com. Call now, 562-715-9945.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
You got a big mouth.
Hello, Joe, you're up. Welcome. We're unapologetically progressive, and we don't black down.
I'm Tavis Smiley, and we're delighted to have you with us in this hour as we reflect on the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter in hospice at his home in Plains, Georgia. The entire city of Plains is on vigil. He has chosen to spend his remaining days at home. And as I said earlier, every one of us has to eventually do that dance with mortality. He's doing it right now. And so in the coming days, there'll be a lot about Jimmy Carter to be discussed as people look anew at his presidency, only a one-term president, but a great deal accomplished in that 4-year period. And we're discussing some of that with the author of the book, The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter, Kai Bird. Again, in the coming days, I'll be playing more and more clips from many of my conversations with the former president, who I adored as a person, and just delighted to have had so many opportunities to spend time talking to him. I'm watching my clock here. A few more things I want to cover between now and the top of the hour, Kai Bird, when I lose you. Let me move through some things rather swiftly here. Number one, you mentioned earlier, quoting a great writer, that Jimmy Carter was one of the toughest guys he'd ever met. I'm paraphrasing that now. He was a tough guy. And I'm wondering what he brought from his Navy service to his public service.
Well, he famously, in the White House, was a man who paid attention to detail. And he got that from, being an engineer studying nuclear physics in the Navy, and being a subordinate to Admiral Hyman Rickover, who was building our nuclear Navy submarine armada at the time. And so he paid attention to detail, which is a great quality, you'd think, to have in a president, a man who gets up with the dawn, 5:30, 6 in the morning, and is in the Oval Office a half an hour later and spends 12 hours reading 200 or 300 pages of memos every day, paying attention to detail. That's what he was taught in the Navy.
Yeah. What's always been fascinating for me, and he and I discussed this on one or two occasions, fascinating for me that here's a guy who served in the military, but if you ask him the things that he's proudest of in his 4-year one term as president, you heard it earlier at the top of this hour in the clip that I played. One of the things he was grateful for was that during his presidency, he never fired, that is to say the U.S. military, never fired a single bullet. We never launched a single missile. We never put boots on the ground in any country. For a guy who served in the Navy, he was awfully proud of the fact that he never led the U.S. in any sort of military excursion. How do you juxtapose those two things?
Well, this is a man who is a man of faith, and he wanted at all costs to avoid war, unnecessary war. So recall when our hostages were taken by the Iranian revolutionary regime in November of '79, Carter refused, although his advisors tried to argue with him, he refused to retaliate with military force. He argued that diplomacy would take care of this issue, and he was right in the end, but it was costly. That hostage crisis wounded his presidency.
Yeah, no question about that. Many years ago, some years ago, I had a conversation with Professor Lewis V. Baldwin. Lewis Baldwin is a major scholar. His work has focused for many decades, now retired at Vanderbilt, but is a King scholar, as in Martin Luther King Jr., a King scholar. Of course, King comes from Georgia, same state as Jimmy Carter, Georgia. And Professor Baldwin once said to me in a conversation, Kai Bird, that Tavis, this might shock you, and it might shock your audience, but he said to me, I do not personally believe that a true Christian could ever be president of the United States. Now, Professor Baldwin said that to me many years ago, and I've been wrestling with that thing for a decade now. And I can't, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around whether or not I agree with Professor Baldwin, that a true Christian could never be president of the United States. Now, I take the point that he's making. One only needs to start with the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. Jimmy Carter certainly didn't violate that particular commandment. But here Jimmy Carter was a man of faith. He was an evangelical. He until recently, he was teaching his class Sunday school every Sunday at his church, Maranatha, in in Plains, Georgia. He clearly is a man of faith, and yet when he stood for re-election in 1980, to your point earlier, the evangelical community turned against Jimmy Carter. Take me back to that moment and tell me why they turned against him for Ronald Reagan.
They turned against him because in 1980, many all over the South, but in other parts of the country too, there were springing up white religious academies that were being built to evade school desegregation. And they had tax-exempt status as, a church, a religious organization. And Carter decided this was wrong, that these people were doing this out of racism. And so he took away their tax-exempt status. And evangelical leaders were furious. And so, people like Pat Robertson went into churches and preached against Carter and said he wasn't a true Christian. So I disagree with your other historian there. I think, Carter is obviously a Christian, a man of deep faith, and he was a president, and he tried very hard to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And he paid the consequences for it. So many people would say he was a great president, but a bad politician.
Yep, I hear your point. And if it makes you feel better, I told Professor Baldwin that if, in fact, a true Christian can be president of the United States, I would offer Jimmy Carter as Exhibit A. That's as close as I can get. Jimmy Carter would be my Exhibit A in my defense. If I believed the notion that a Christian could, in fact, be president, I'm offering you Jimmy Carter. So you and I, Kai Bird, agree in that regard. That said, we mentioned Ronald Reagan a few times earlier in this conversation. Here he comes back again, because in retrospect, and I was much younger then, of course, but in retrospect, studying President Carter's record and his policies and his points of views, you're right about the fact, being a historian and scholar yourself, of course, that he was liberal on race and social issues, much more conservative on other issues, including the issue of small government. In retrospect, it's fascinating to consider that he and Reagan were not that dissimilar on the scope, perhaps, and certainly the size of government.
Right. No, that's true. Carter was always looking for small government solutions. On the other hand, and he didn't want to spend a lot of money on big government projects. He famously vetoed a bunch of pork barrel projects that were like Army Corps of Engineer water dams in small congressional districts all over the country. And of course, he paid a political price for this. But he also, when he saw an opportunity to spend federal dollars on good things like expanding food stamps to largely black, rural, poor in the South, Carter did that, and he expanded. Millions of people got access to food stamps during his presidency that otherwise would not have had access to this cheap food.
Yeah.
And he was willing to do that and spend dollars in that way. But, he had a skeptical eye on big defense expenditures. He didn't want to build dams and that were unnecessary. He had a sort of small town fiscal conservative streak to him.
Yeah. Back to our notion of his being a person of faith, there's a Bible verse that says a good name is rather to be preferred than great riches. Take a good name any day over great riches. Jimmy Carter wasn't altogether poor, but a good name is what he was after, and he was and is, in fact, a good man. When we come forward, one of the things I want to get Kai Bird's take on is why Jimmy Carter did not fare so well in Washington. In the coming days, we'll play some clips where Jimmy Carter and I were talking about this, but he said to me, Tavis, I think there are a couple of reasons why perhaps a couple of mistakes I made in Washington. And when we come forward, I'm going to tell you what two of those mistakes were that Jimmy Carter confessed to me that he made, and we'll get Kai Bird's take on that and a great deal more as we continue our conversation about his book, The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. You're listening to Kai Bird on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
This Sunday, February 26th from 12 to 5 p.m., Debbie Allen is hosting a free community block party. Enjoy free carnival rides, games, and dance classes. It's all happening Sunday at the Debbie Allen Dance Academy on Washington Boulevard from Western to St. Andrews. Visit DebbieAllenDanceAcademy.com for more information.
Let's get back to business, Los Angeles County. The Economic Opportunity Grant Program is now open. This program is designed to provide financial support to qualified small businesses, micro entrepreneurs, food industry businesses such as restaurants, and nonprofits in Los Angeles County. Approximately 4,600 grants of up to $2,500 will be administered to qualified micro businesses that face barriers to accessing capital resources. To learn more about the Economic Opportunity Grant Program, visit www.grants.lacounty.gov. The application process is fast and easy. Don't miss the opportunity to get back to business. This program is administered by the County of Los Angeles through its Department of Economic Opportunity and funded in part through a grant from the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. Application portal is powered by Lendistry. Visit www.grants.lacounty.gov and get back to business.
Life is uncertain. It's okay to feel stressed, anxious, worried, or frustrated. It's normal. With CalHope's free and secure mental health resources, it's easy to get the help you and your loved ones need when you need it the most. Call our warm line at 833-317-4673 or live chat at calhope.org today.
New Assembly bill would ban the use of police canines for arrest and crowd control. Maisha Cairo here with your K-Black Minute News, brought to you by Lendistry. Assemblymember Corey Jackson introduced AB 742 that would prohibit the use of police canines for arrests, apprehensions, and crowd control. The use of police canines, supporters of the legislation say, is a throwback to the darkest days of legal slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and a reminder of America's history of racial bias, aggression, and violence against Black people and people of color. What say you, KBLA listeners? Let us know at KBLA 1580 on all social media channels.
Thanks to our new sponsor, Lendistry. Lendistry is a national Black-led small business lender that is headquartered in Los Angeles. Lendistry helps small business owners access the affordable capital needed to grow. Visit Lendistry, LENDISTRY.com/KBLA today.
We knew you'd stick around. This is LA's home for progressive talk radio. Welcome back to KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Tavis Smiley. Our guest in this hour is the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and journalist Kai Bird. We're discussing his book, The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter, now out in paperback. And I'm just delighted to have an expert on all things Jimmy Carter in dialogue this hour as we send prayers up for Jimmy Carter, who's now at home in Plains, Georgia, choosing to spend his remaining days in hospice. So there were two things, Kai Bird, that Jimmy Carter said to me that he thought he could have done better at while he was president in the 76 through 80. No particular order. Number one, he confessed to me, Tavis, I'm not sure I had the best relationship with the media. I wasn't particularly fond of them, and they weren't particularly fond of me. So I didn't get along as well as I could have with the media. In retrospect, I understand how I could have been better served by a better relationship. And secondly, he said, Rosalind and I, we're not people that like to party and go out at night. And so he, a small town guy, and he didn't really like the Washington elite. They didn't like him. He didn't do the social circuit, and he realized in retrospect how, perhaps ingratiating himself more to the Washington elite might have aided and abetted his presidency. But those are two things he shared with me. What do you take? What's your take on those two things?
Yeah, I asked him in one of my interviews why he turned down so many dinner invitations from Catherine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post.
Right.
And there was a long pause, And he looked at me and he says, well, maybe that was a mistake.
Yeah.
You know, Catherine Graham was a powerful publisher, lived in a fancy mansion in Georgetown. And, you know, Jimmy Carter and his White House aides, they liked to socialize over pizza and a beer. And these fancy Georgetown parties just weren't their style. You know, he had a terrible relationship with the Washington Post, and they made fun of him. They made fun of his Southern accent, and they mocked him. It was just terrible. You know, they did stories. For instance, did you know, Tavis, that his daughter Amy was, 9 years old, 7, 8, 9 years old, and her nanny was a woman named Mary Prince, who was a convicted murderess, who was still serving time in Georgia prisons when Carter's, believing that she was innocent, took her out and provided her clemency so that she could serve her parole in the White House, serving as the nanny. So and the Washington Post took this story of, sort of Christian charity and turned it around and mocked it. It was, he just had a terrible problem with the Washington press. It's a small town run by a certain elite, and they just didn't fit in.
Yeah, that's a story I did not know, and that's why you talk to folk like Kai Bird to learn things about the life and legacy of one Jimmy Carter that one might not know so well. Again, in the coming days, I suspect we'll see Kai Bird all over the place. I'm glad I got him early because everybody's going to be calling him, and he'll be sharing his accounts of his conversations and his relationship with President Carter in the days ahead. When we come forward in our remaining moments with Kai Bird on this program on KBLA Talk 1580, I want to come to this, to close our conversation, come to this notion of Jimmy Carter's depression. For a guy who was a person of an abiding and a deep faith, he did, in fact, fall into a very deep depression once he lost that election. But he pulled himself out of it and went on to do some amazing work in this country and around the globe. And for it, he's received every honor imaginable, including, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize. I call that acquitting yourself quite nicely. And that's why he calls his book The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. Our remaining moments with Kai Bird, historian and Pulitzer Prize winner, when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
The station you turn to when you've had it up to gear with cultural incompetence. KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminding you that we keep us safe. The Center for the Pacific Asian Family was founded to help address domestic violence and sexual assault in the Asian and the Pacific Islander communities. The Center for the Pacific Asian Family's mission is to build healthy and safe communities by addressing the root causes and consequences of family violence and violence against women. They are committed to meeting the specific cultural and language needs of the Asian and Pacific Islander women and their families. CPAF's vision is of an Asian and Pacific Islander community that embraces healthy relationships and works in partnership with other communities to eradicate all forms of violence. To access services, volunteer, or for more info, visit nurturingchange.org. At KBLA Talk 1580, we believe everyone deserves to be safe. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
You know that Big Bargain detergent jug is 85% water, right?
85% water? I thought I was getting a better deal because it's so big.
If you want a better clean, Tide Pods are only 12% water. The rest is pure, concentrated cleaning ingredients.
Ooh, pass me the intercom thingy.
Attention shoppers. If you want a real deal, try Tide Pods.
Don't pay for water. Pay for clean. If it's got to be clean, it's got to be Tide Pods.
Water content based on the leading bargain liquid detergent. Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is killing people. It's a powerful opioid, often made illegally and commonly mixed with illicit drugs. It can even be pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medications. Just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, could potentially be lethal. This isn't an ad to scare you. But it is an ad to make you think twice. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
Interrogating your assumptions and expanding your inventory of ideas. Let's get back to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to Pulitzer Prize winner, historian and journalist Kai Bird, author of the book The Outlier: The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter, now out in paperback. A few minutes left here, Kai Bird, in this conversation. I thank you so much for just taking the time to spend with us in this hour. Jimmy Carter, to your earlier point, fell into a deep depression after losing that race to Ronald Reagan. It was a landslide victory for Ronald Reagan back in 1980. Talk to me about the depression and how he pulled himself ultimately out of it.
Yes, well, he's a strong man, but he was certainly shocked by his defeat at the hands of Ronald Reagan. And he came back to Plains, Georgia, to the house that he had built in 1961, where he's lived ever since. And he was, sort of wondering what to do with the rest of his life. He was still a man in his 50s. And one night he suddenly sat up straight in bed, and his wife, Rosalind, stirred and looked at him and said, "Jimmy, are you ill?" Because he was a sound sleeper normally. And he said, "Well, I've suddenly had a good idea. I know what we should do. We should build the Carter Center, devoted to conflict resolution and doing good works around the world." So, that's what he's done for the next 40 years. And among other things, he has taken on the eradication of guinea worm disease in Africa. There were millions of cases of this terrible disease, and last year, in 2022, there were only 13 remaining cases in human beings. And I remember him joking with me at times that he wanted to, he was in his 90s then already, and he wanted to outlive the last guinea worm. And I think he's very close to it, very close to it.
Yeah. Let me ask you, I got just about a minute and a half here left, and we'll talk again, I hope, somewhere down the road. But what's your personal takeaway? You heard me earlier express my own sentiment about the president and in the way that I've gotten to know him. You spent more time with him than I have, in fact. But what's your personal takeaway about the man, Jimmy Carter?
Well, I think his standing in the history books is going to only rise. He was, without a doubt, the most intelligent, the most hardworking, and the most decent man who's occupied the Oval Office in the 20th century. And that's saying a lot. Those are qualities that we would like to have in a president. He had only 4 years, but it was scandal-free. There were no scandals in his presidency. There was no corruption, and he accomplished a lot, passed a lot of domestic legislation, and he had many foreign policy triumphs, including the brilliant diplomacy at Camp David that brought peace between Israel and Egypt. So I think he's going to go down in the history books as a great president someday, but we have to get rid of these notions that we have of him as a great ex-president and a failed president. Nope. It's much more complicated, that story.
I take your point, and I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. Kai Bird is a Pulitzer Prize winning historian and journalist, and not just a Pulitzer Prize winning, he is an elected member of the prestigious Society of American Historians, so he stands head and shoulders above many of the others who do this great work every day. Kai Bird, good to have you on. Thank you for this book, The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter, now out in paperback, and we'll talk again down the road, my friend.
Thank you, Tavis.
All the best to you. Thank you. In the next hour, after news, traffic, and sports, the motivator Les Brown returns to continue his month-long radio residency. You've got to be hungry with Les Brown on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Doug Davis, and here's the latest from the Black Information Network. In Memphis, Tennessee, the Shelby County Commission is approving $5 million towards a reparations program. Officials say the money will go toward looking at disparities between black and white people and then provide funding for programs to minimize the disparities. Those in favor say it will help increase black wealth in the area. A town in Massachusetts is settling a lawsuit